Hello there and welcome to our another exciting lesson on C++ fundamentals. Today we are going to talk about arrays. So what exactly is array? Well, think about it as a collection of elements of the same data type stored by the same name. So let's say I have several boxes of books and I want to store the amount of books in each box. Of course, I can create several different variables, but instead of that, I can create array with 5 elements, and each element will contain the amount of books I have in each box. So to do that, let's declare the data type of our array's elements. I need the amount of books, so it will be integer. Let's also name our array. I will name it books. And in the square bracket, I'm going to define the size of my array. It's 5. So this is it. I declared the array of 5 integers, and now my compiler will allocate a place in our computer memory to store these 5 integers. I can assign values to my array's members later, or I can immediately initialize my array. To do that, let's open curly brackets. And here I'm going to write 5 integers. So let's say in the first box I have 12 books, in second one 17, 20, 15, and 25. Okay, and in this way I initialized my array. So how can I now reach members of my array? Let's, for example, I want to show in the console how many books I have in the box number 2. So to do that, let's write our keyword cout and let's try to write name of our array. And in the square brackets, I'm going to write 2. And let's also add end line. Now let's check the result. Let's build and run our program. And you can see that now I see in the console number 20. It might be confusing because actually I called for the member of our book array number 2, but it seems that I have element number 3. That's something you should always take into account, that when you work with arrays in programming languages, the counting always starts with 0. So the first element of your array has number 0, second one number 1, and so on. So when you declare your array in the square brackets, you show how many members you want your array have, but the countings of the members starts from 0. So if I try to reach the member number 0, books 0, let's once again build and run our program, and you can see that element number 0 is actually this first element 12. And if I try to reach element books 5, let's now try to build and run our program, and you can see the result is 0. So the result is 0 because in computer memory array is stored one by one. So you have 4 bytes of the memory for first integers, then 4 bytes of the next one, and so on and so on. And now we are trying to reach the member number 5, which is empty, or sometimes you can get some garbage because you just try to reach the place in your memory that is beyond your array scope. So always be careful with your arrays and don't reach the members of the array that doesn't exist. So let's now once again show the element number 2 in my console, and in the next row let's try to assign some different value. So let's say now in the box number 2 I want to have 5 books, and if we try to write new amount of the books in the console, let's build and run our program, and you can see the result of the first line. I had 20 books in my second member of my array, and then I assigned a new value to my second member of array 5, and now I have number 5 stored in the second member of my array. So if you don't want to initialize your array immediately, you can assign something to its member later, but once again, be sure that you don't leave anything empty, because if you try to reach the member of your array that wasn't initialized and you didn't assign anything there, you can get some garbage that was stored before in this place of the computer memory. And of course I can use arrays not only for integers but for any other data types. Let's for example try to declare array of strings. So just write string, and let's say I want to store the array of the names of my friend I want to visit during the weekend. So let's call our array friends, and I want to visit 3 friends during the weekend. And once again I can immediately initialize my array, writing strings I want to store in each array value. So friend 0 will be, let's call her Sally. Friend 1 will be Jessica, and friend 3 will be David. Now let's try to write to our console, I want to visit, and let's write our friend's name. Let's call for our friend number 0, and let's add end line. Now let's build and run our program, and you can see the result, I want to visit Sally. So if I can create array of anything, can I create array of arrays, or so-called multidimensional array? Let's say I want to store in my array not the linear array but some matrix with 2 rows and 3 columns. So I want to be able to store something like 2, 7, 8. It will be my first row of my matrix, and second row will be 9, 11 and 17. To do that, we should now declare multidimensional array. So to declare multidimensional array, let's once again decide what will be the data type of our members. So I want to store here integer, so let's write integer, and now we should give the name to our multidimensional array. Let's call it matrix. And now in the first square brackets I need to write the number of rows in my matrix, or in other words, number of subarrays of my array. So it will be 2. I need to create 2 subarrays, 2 rows. And in the second square brackets I'm going to write the number of columns that my multidimensional, my square array will have, or in other words, the size of this subarray. Size of subarray is 3. And once again I can assign my values to my array later, or I can immediately initialize it. Once again I need to open curly brackets, and inside of the curly brackets I will open another curly brackets, and in these curly brackets I will list the first subarray members. So it's 2, 7, 8. Now I'm going to write comma because I declared the first subarray. Now I'm going to initialize, so I initialized first subarray. Now I want to initialize second subarray. So once again open curly brackets for the second subarray, and in the curly brackets for the second subarray I will initialize this second subarray, second row of my matrix. So I'm going to write 9, 11 and 17, and don't forget semicolon at the end of your statement. Okay, now if we want to reach any member of my multidimensional array, once again let's try to write something to our console, and let's say I want to reach a member in the first subarray, this member number 7. So once again you remember that we're starting to count our members of array from 0, so the number of the first subarray is 0, the number of our first row, and in the second square brackets I'm going to write the number of the member of this subarray. So in 2, 7, 8 the number of member 7 is 1, because 0 stands for 2, 1 for 7. So let's write here 1, and once again let's write end line, and let's try to build and run this program, and I'm expecting to see number 7 in the console. And indeed you can see that result is 7. So we checked the first member of our zeros subarray. It's 7. Okay, I hope all these arrays and subarrays are not very confusing for you. If so, right now I'm going to show you another tool in C++ that you can use to store arrays, to store a collection of data. And it's much more flexible than array because first of all it has dynamic type, so you don't need to worry about the fixed size of this instrument, and second is that it's actually a class, another C++ class, so it has lots of very valuable and helpful functions you can use. And the name of this class is vector. To use the vector, once again, I need to include this vector class in our program. To do that, let's write include, and the header is the name of our class, vector. And let's say once again I want to create some variable to store amount of the books in different boxes I have. So to declare the vector of integers that will store my books, I will write the word vector, and in these brackets I'm going to declare the data type I'm going to store in my vector. Once again, I need to name my vector somehow, so let's name it books. And to initialize my vector, to store 5 integers in my vector, once again, let's open curly brackets and write different amount of books we have in different boxes. Okay, now I have something similar to the array. I have some set of the integers. Once again, if I want to reach some of the vector's members, I need to write its name, and in the square brackets the number of our value I want to reach. And once again, you should remember that in vector it's same as array. We start our counting from 0, so 12 is the member number 0, 7 is the member number 1. So if I try to reach the member number 2, I expect to see number 56 in my console. Let's build and run our program. And indeed, I see 56. Okay, but let's say someone sent me another box of my books, and now I have one more box of the books I want to add to my vector. Arrays has a fixed size, so if you want to add one more member to the array, you need to declare another array. But for the vector it's much simpler. Vector has dynamic size, so if I want to add one more member of my collection to the end of my vector, you should use function pushback, and in the round brackets we are going to write the new member of our array. So let's say we want to add 34. And I expect that now the size of my vector is not 5 but 6. So let's try to reach this new member of our array, writing books 5 to the console. And you can see that indeed I have now 34 in my vector. Another useful function you can use for the vector is size. So if you want to check the size of your vector, use function size. Okay, let's try to write the size of our array before the change. So let's add here word before. And now let's also check after we used pushback. So I'm going to check the size of my vector before my changes. You see that I just initialized my vector with 5 integers, so I'm expecting size to be 5. Then I pushed back one more member, and I expect that new size will be 6. And you can see that indeed when we initialized our vector with 5 members, we created vector of 5 integers with the size 5. And after we pushed back one more member, now we have vector with the size 6. Okay, but what if I want not to add one more member to the end of my vector? What if I want to remove member from my vector? Once again, with array it will be very complicated to do because array has fixed size, but with vector once again it's very simple. To do this, you should use command, not pushback but popback. And popback will erase the last member of our array. Let's actually do this popback twice. And now we are going to check the size of my books vector again. And I will comment this string. So let's once again run our program. And indeed, you can see that after I pushed back one more member, I have an array with a new member with the size +1. And after I erased my two last member, now I have array with the size 4. Okay, so we already learned 3 very useful functions to work with the array is pushback, popback, and size. One more function I want to show you is how to check if your vector is empty. Because if, for example, I just declare my vector like this, vector books, I'm going just to create empty vector. And to check that vector is empty, use function empty. So write books empty, and result will be bool variable. So you already know from the lecture about data types that bool variable has values true or false. True stands for 1 and false stands for 0. So if my vector is empty, books.empty will be equal to 1. Let's build and run our program. And indeed, you can see the result 1. So it's true. My vector right now is empty. Okay, but what if I don't want to create empty vector? I want to create vector of some size. Like, for example, you remember we created array with size 5. To create a vector with size 5, just write the size of our vector in the round brackets after the name of the vector. And now we have a vector that is not empty, but actually have 5 slots in the memory, 5 members, and by default the value of each member is 0. So when you use vector, once again, you shouldn't worry about garbage in your memory you are going to allocate. Vector will clean it, and if I declare vector with a size 5, I have a vector where we have 5 members and each member is 0. So let's once again check if my vector now is empty, and you can see the result 0. No, I have now 5 members in my vector. And if I try to reach some member, let's say I want to check what is in the member number 3, if it's really 0. Let's build and run our program. And indeed, you can see I have vector with 5 zeros. So let's add comment here. So this is vector 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Looks like this, but of course you can assign any other value to your vector's members. Okay, if I can declare a vector of 5 zeros, maybe I can declare a vector with some size, and each member of vector will be some different value, not 0. And you can do this as well. Let's create vector. Let's now create vector not of integers but of strings. And once again, open round brackets. First I need to write the amount of members in my vector. So let's say it's 3. Oh, I forgot to name my vector. Let's once again name it friends. And I'm going to have 3 friends, but each of my friends will have the same name, Julia. Okay, so now I have vector of 3 strings, and each value of each member is Julia. Let's check if it's true. Let's try to write the value of the first member of my array to the console. Build and run program, and you can see that indeed now I have vector of 3 strings, and each string is equal to Julia. So you can see that actually I can create vector of anything, and I guess you already think, if I can create vector of anything, can I create vector of vectors? And of course you can, and that's once again equivalent of our multidimensional array we discussed when we talked about arrays. So if, for example, I want to create multidimensional vector. So it will be some matrix that will look like this. To do this, I will declare vector of vectors. So let's once again write vector. And in this triangle bracket, sorry, I don't know what's its name, I'm going to write once again vector of integers. And you can see that now I have vector of vectors. So my first vector will be 2, 3, 5. And second vector will be 7, 8, 10. So if I declare my vector of vectors like this, once again I will have just empty vector. If I'm going to write here the size, let's say size 2, in this way I declared a vector that contains 2 empty vectors. So now I have vector that contains 2 members. First member is empty vector and second member is also empty vector. Let's say, for example, I want to create a vector of vectors, but I want all subvectors to be the same. So once again, so in this case, once again in our square brackets, write comma and declare the type of the subvector. So vector integer 3. I create vector that contains 2 subvectors, and each of my subvectors has size 3 and it filled with 0. So when I declared a construction that looks like this, basically right now it contains something like this 0, 0, 0, and second vector also 0, 0, 0. We can check this. Let's type some of the member of our vector matrix to the console. To reach first and second subvector, I should in the square bracket write the number of my vector. Let's say I want to reach the vector number 0, and to reach the member of the subvector, I should once again write the number of this member in the second square brackets. Let's write end line and let's build and run our program, and you can see that indeed we have result 0. So we checked first subvector and its member number 1, this 0. Okay, so now I can of course assign a new value to each member of my vector of vectors. Alternatively, I can initialize my vector. And if I initialize my vector, I don't need to write the size of my vector because it will automatically create the suitable size. So to initialize vector of vectors, do it in the same way we did it for the multidimensional array. Open curly brackets, and in the first curly brackets, list the members of the first subvector, and then write comma. Once again, open curly brackets, and in the second curly brackets we are going to list members of our second subvector. Okay, and now if I try to once again reach some member of my vector of vectors in first square brackets, let's try to reach the second vector. So let's type 1. And now let's try to reach the last member of our second subvector. So it's 2 because it's 0, 1, 2. And once again end line. And you can see that indeed result is 10. Okay, so in this lesson we discussed such fundamental construction of C++ language as array, and we also discussed class vector. So what's the difference between arrays and vectors, and when it's better to use arrays and when it's better to use vectors? So it's better to use arrays when performance of your program is critical for you, because array is a low-level construction. You don't need to include any special classes to use array. Also, working with array gives you more flexibility in terms of working with the computer memory, because with arrays you can use pointers and addresses, and perform different low-level manipulation with computer memory. Vector indeed doesn't give you such opportunity, but vectors give you much higher flexibility. First of all, the size of the vector is not fixed but dynamic, so you can easily change the size of your array. It's more safe, and you don't need to think about the buffer overflow, and you don't need to think all the time about your array's boundaries. Also, vector class has lots of useful functions, and it's more suitable for the modern C++. So if you're a beginner and you don't want to think about work with pointers, addresses, you want more flexibility, more safety in your program, use vector. But if you are very advanced, super senior that always takes care about program performance, about your memory, you are not afraid of the Stack Overflow, in this case, of course, use arrays. At the end of this lesson, I want to add a couple of words about strings, because string is also some kind of array, but it's more similar to the vector because it has a dynamic size and huge functionality and ability to change the size of your string. So let's create some string. String, let's call it, I don't know, name, and write my name. And for example, if I want to reach some member of my string, we discussed in the previous lecture that string contains of the chars. So basically here I created string that contains 5 chars, so it's somehow similar to the vector of chars. And if I want to reach any letter, any char in my string, I should write the name of my string, and in the square brackets the number of the char I want to reach. And once again, keep in mind that counting of our strings members starts from 0. So D is char number 0, I is char number 1, print name our char number 0 to the console, and you can see the result is D. And the cool stuff is that string class has lots of functions similar to the vector. So for example, if I want to check the size of my string, once again type name, the name of our string, dot, and function size, and round brackets. And now let's try to build and run this program, and you can see that indeed my name contains 5 chars, 5 letters. If I want to add one more letter to my name, I can use same function we used for the vector, push back. So let's add my initials to the name, push back, and I want to push back chars space, and also I want to push back char for my initials. Okay, let's now try to once again type size of my name after I pushed back 2 chars. And let's also check that actually we pushed back something. Let's type our name, my name. Now let's build and run our program, and you can see that initially the size of my name was 5. After I pushed back 2 chars, the size is 7, and we have new string Diana K after we pushed back 2 more chars. And in the same way you can remove chars from the end of your string using command popback. Popback will remove the last char of your string. Okay, this is it for now. I hope this lesson was really useful for you. If you still have any questions on how to work with arrays, vectors, maybe you have some question about multidimensional vectors and arrays, or maybe you want to ask something additional about strings, write in the comments, and I'll see you in the next lesson.